So please, Assen, Alex, the stage is yours.
Well, thank you for coming to our short lecture. Yes, indeed, we'll talk about design system, and more of a focus will be, I guess, design language as a whole and how we work. But we'll first start with an additional short introduction after yours, for which I thank you.
Hello, my name is Alexander and it's very hard to be said for how many years I do design, because I've been studying in a high school of arts, and I did a lot of school projects, design related. Then during my bachelor in the National Academy of Arts, I've been working as a freelance designer. I also did a lot of school projects that are design related. And during my master's, I officially started working in a software company where I've been designing websites, mobile applications, and also the UI design for the content management system that was one of our main products. Then I started in SAP. It was like 6.5 years ago, and most of the time, around 5 years and a half, I've been designing Fiori controls and documenting them. And I also had some side projects as a UX designer for development tools that we built in SAP. And now it's Assen's turn to introduce himself.
Yeah, I guess it's my turn to tell you a few words about myself, so you know if you should actually listen. I have about 20 years of experience now. By that I mean getting paid to do design. US user experience has been my focus since university. I'm a graduate from those two universities, and this is when I was actually introduced to that term, user experience design. Basically, I do it since the day it was a bit more practical than modern. I have quite a lot of companies that I've worked for. Here are just a few of them. Obviously, currently I'm working at SAP, but I've worked with a lot of Fortune 500 or smaller companies, either as an employer or in my freelance initiatives that I do. And I've also run a few businesses, from children books to clothing brand. I used to have a software consultancy and so on. But at the moment, I'm an SAP employee, and what I work on is different applications, and mainly the cloud platform for SAP, different aspects of that platform, and something a bit, I would call it more interesting, are the COIs, the command line interfaces, which are definitely different than what you see on most screens these days. But let's focus on what we'll talk about. If this is the design process illustrated from a greater height, something I often show to clients when I work with them. This is what we will talk about today. What is our process, how we work in an enterprise environment. We'll mention terms like atoms, molecules, or basically the parts of the atomic design process, because we use it. I want to stress that this is our process. This is not a presentation about how you should do things, but rather how we do them. And hopefully you'll be able to take a few bits and pieces and apply them to your work, or maybe decide not to apply them because you feel they're not the correct way to do things. We will present some parts of our process in these 30 minutes, how we create the elements that build a Fiori design language, and how we create the actual technical implementation. In our team, we design products for different SAP solutions, different services, and we also maintain an extensive sketch library for Fiori language. And our work requires a few things. That is consistency. We do have to strive for consistency a bit more than in other environments due to the nature of the work and the huge portfolio of solutions that we have. And we do have to adhere to very strict standards as a company. UX standards, for example, where the actions we replaced, what is the terminology, do we have theming, is the digital assistant used correctly or not, and so on and so forth. Why we have to do this? Because the processes are quite complex. For example, with car parts manufacturer, Male, if you have a car, most likely you have something that they've done. A typical process for even a simple part can go through a department that deals with environmental and government requirements, research and development, manufacturing, legal, so on and so forth. And all these things are in their own silos, and we have to connect them with software. Because of these processes, we have different UI technologies, either because we purchased a company and they have their own technology stack and we have to integrate with them, or we've found a better way to do things to apply the Fiori language. Nonetheless, we do have quite a few of them. Here are just a few. UI5, component library, similar to what, for example, Progress, the Accelerate does also in Bulgaria, or Infragistics. UI5 web components, different way to apply the Fiori language through web components, fundamental styles, CSS styling way. So different ways to apply the visual language of Fiori in the different teams and the different products that we have. And how we start to build this thing is something that my colleague will now talk about. Yeah, you're good to go.
Yeah, okay. So after the sense introduction to the process and technologies, I'll share you with what is the process and challenges of creating a control, the smallest building block of our framework. We follow a strict process when creating controls and control enhancements, because everything added to the library needs to be future-proof and backward compatible. Everything starts with collecting requirements. This could be from stakeholders via field research or previously conducted user tests. Then is the interaction design phase, where we clear the concept of the control, how the control behaves on desktop and mobile, how the control works combined with the rest of the Fiori controls. Do they behave consistently? Can we enhance something already developed instead of introducing a new control? And then how to make it accessible for screen reader support, keyboard navigation, and translation. My part is in the process is the visual design, where we apply the design principles defined by the visual design framework. It looks sometimes that we are drawing in a coloring book, but actually there is a complex science behind this. I'll show you in a bit. Colors have to meet the accessibility standards, minimum contrast ratio, and differentiation and between the interaction and value states. We test how the control works in light, dark, hybrid, and in accessibility teams. And last but not least, it's the teamability, because our applications could be teamed via a tool called Team Designer. And then we document the design using the already defined parameter structure for colors and metrics, which ensures for easy teamability of the controls. Then, of course, is the development phase, where the specified control design is being turned into code using different technologies. As Assen mentioned, we have UI5. This could be Angular or fundamental styles, or even UI5 web components. Then the challenges in the visual design. Actually, the challenges in this phase are quite a lot. So let's take one of the bread and butter controls, the input field. It has multiple interaction states: normal, hover, focus, disabled, and read-only. It also supports value states: success, warning, error, and information. All these states should be easy to distinguish even for people with impaired vision. The contrast between states should be at least 3:1, or an additional element should be added or altered. In the case of the input, we change the border thickness for some of the value states. Then we have the same control combined with our other controls, like a button, to trigger an additional dialog or a popover. And all these combined together should work on all backgrounds that we have. In SAP products, we fulfill most strict accessibility standards, and with every new team introduction, all the new covers require testing in different combinations. We also have accessibility teams, high contrast black and high contrast white, targeted to visual impaired people. These teams have limited color palette, and this is additional challenge to differentiate controls in their states. For some of them, we include additional icons because the color is not an indicator. We designed a sketch library where the control structure is as close as possible to the actual structure in the code, and the color parameter mapping is the same as in the implementation. In a couple of clicks, we can see how the already designed applications look with the new color parameters, which helps a lot to test the color contrast, typographic scale, and controls in their most complex scenarios. This diagram shows the complexity behind our parameter structure. There are multiple levels of inheritance and color calculations. This allows customers to theme the whole application or certain parts of it without breaking the Fiori standards. We've mentioned Fiori multiple times, but now I'll try to explain what Fiori is. But first, I'll tell you what Fiori isn't. Fiori is not a UI framework nor a control library in the way we know it. It's a visual design language and a set of guidelines that covers not only visual design, typography, iconography, motion design, and illustration styles, but also defines popular patterns, layouts, and templates. A good analogy is creating a font family. It's not enough to create a good looking letter, number, or symbol. To create a font family, it's required to have letters, numbers, and symbols that are harmonious in all combinations. The same is with Fiori. It's not enough to create one beautiful application, but keeping the application portfolio consistent. The same approach for action placement, back navigation, keyboard navigation, terminology keeps everything consistent. Different set of rules exist for different media types. We have Fiori for web, Fiori for iOS, Fiori for Android, and Fiori for tools, because developer tools are more complex than the standard client transactional applications and require additional set of guidelines to govern the complex product navigation, negative design, analytics, personalization, and embedded help. Being part of a control design team, I went through 3 Fiori versions with their respective teams. Blue Crystal and the accessibility team, high contrast black for Fiori. Belize Deep, and the hybrid team for Fiori 2. Quartz Light, Quartz Dark, and the accessibility teams, high contrast black and high contrast white for Fiori 3. This is only a small set of controls and control combinations that we have in our library. All colors, shapes, and sizes are connected with parameters, and this allows, as I mentioned before, to speed up the process of testing new team colors. And now, speaking of speed, you can build the best visual design framework, but does it worth it if nobody uses it? SAP has hundreds or even thousands of applications developed using legacy technologies or acquired products with own design. To fulfill the product standards, they were required to adopt Fiori guidelines in newer UI frameworks. To speed up the adoption process, we've developed smart controls. The smart controls are semantically grouped smaller parts into a more complex pattern. This allows quick application development with relatively no effort. One of those smart controls is the object page, a page template for displaying and managing objects. It's very easy to map the content with OData and have the application up and running in no time. But the speed approach is very restrictive. Not every application has the same set of data. Some of the pages looked empty with a lot of wasted space. And then adding new functionality, modifying the layout to fit the various content was a long process of finding workarounds. And here comes the fundamental question: how complex the building blocks should be. More complex building blocks help to build the applications faster, but this comes with the cost, the less flexibility. On the other hand, the simpler building blocks gives more flexibility, but are more time consuming, and the consistency throughout the application portfolio suffer. And I'll show you the next, our other approach in the next slide. So to fulfill the needs for more flexibility in the object page, the dynamic page was introduced. It's, as the name suggests, it's more versatile and generic control. Both templates could look exactly the same. Using the dynamic page control, it's easy to recreate the object page and actually every other page template. Now we have desired flexibility of the content, which allows the integration of any UI5 control in any form. And now I'm going to hand over to Assen to show you how all these control requests are born.
And I'll explain the next steps in our process. That is the future request that we often have. Even though our design language is quite detailed, the technical library is very versatile and tested. A lot of the requests simply are born because we do even more testing and apply this design language and the technology over hundreds and hundreds of products. So there is no way we can envision all the possible combination. Working on a product, you'd know you have various problems to solve. But for us, once we reach certain problem and a possible solution, we do have to compare them. Is this available somewhere else in our ecosystem? Do we have similar problems? Are they solved somewhere across the solution of SAPs? And can we apply what others have done to our own problem and what we're trying to achieve? What happens here is you talk maybe with colleagues or search in the different places that we have in the company, and you might find something, but sometimes you do not. So as in many other places, a new process would start, and you decide how to best handle it. A simple example I would start with is what you see on my screen: text button and a simple interaction where the user might hover over the button and popover is shown. In the different UI libraries that we actually have different implementations for that. What I mean by that is the consideration, should we have atoms or molecules here? Should we have 3 separate elements, or one element that in some places will be used as an inline help is something that we constantly have to consider. And what I'm trying to tell you here is, even though this looks very simple, and it is, depending on the technical implementation, the area of where we'll use that would have a different consideration, and different things will lead the final decision. Should it be a combination of atoms? Should we have a molecule directly? Should the developers have to create their own logic, or they simply have an inline help? Another example I might give you, a bit more complex, is for products in our tools area. For a very long time, we'd had the vertical navigation. It will do what it's supposed to, navigate people. It will be great experience for everybody, until more and more products started to be acquired. Different new solutions were adopted, developed, and suddenly we realized that if we want to stay consistent to what our users want and how their work actually changed, we do have to now have different navigation, and that is the vertical one. And by different navigation, I don't mean we are going to replace the horizontal. By horizontal, I don't mean we replace the vertical one, but what I mean is that we need to develop this. And even though it looks pretty straightforward, okay, we've got a bunch of items, everybody has seen it. Actually, this is not so simple in the enterprise world, because first you have to see where that will be applied. Are you going to ground a few thousand airplanes, for example, because you decide to commit something to an airline system application or not? And we would go and see, are the tabs recognized the tabs? Is the solution really okay? And we would benefit the product. How many of those solutions that we have require this? How are we going to incorporate the navigation between products with vertical and horizontal? And that leads to research. And the user research we do is even based on very small components like tabs, buttons. Everything has to be tested and tested over and over again. But even then, we will run into problems. And I'm sure a lot of you have run into this when you start to combine your design vision with the technical side. Problems arise. I'll again try to illustrate with a simple example. What we have here is a schematic of a layout, 2 columns layout, and a simple table with a selection. But what we started to discover is that many of the development teams and some of the designer teams would allow for people to have multiple selection in a table and visualize something in the second column. The APIs technically allow that, and a lot of the developers would just take the opportunity, be creative, and do it. So it got back to us, and we had to find a solution to the problem. What are actually people seeing in the second column? Because we started to get complaints. Again, something that might look like a simple solution actually proved in that particular case to be quite hard to figure out what will be the indication of what is open. We are far from perfect here, but I would like to connect this with what Alex said about colors and the fact that we need to support different visualizations in terms of theming. And since what we are doing here is already developed. The table is there. We had other elements that would show the user indication of a problem, for example. It was quite troublesome. But what I wanted to tell you is, when you start designing an app, you have a design language, you have the technology. Don't be afraid to go back and test and redesign something, because these things will surface for sure, and it's part of our life. Now I would like to tell you another aspect of our work, and that is the templates. The templates are something that we call layout and floor plans in Fiori. But yeah, they're simply templates. In those templates, we would put the atoms, molecules, and so on of our design language. Here is a schematic of the flexible column layout that we use for some of our products. 3 columns, and in each one you would define what is required. But you might even have other templates inside. For example, in the second column, that might be a dynamic page. I would also like to share briefly how is our day-to-day done. This is only one aspect of it, because we use not only Sketch, we use Figma, Adobe XD. It really depends on the team, on the project, or the actual location of the team. But we might have a sketch file that is our layout designed by a colleague, and it will be simply that, a layout that you can start to use straight away as a designer, open it, and have a very fast run. There is no need to combine those elements. Then we would have maybe a different sketch file for the floor plan. That will be a dynamic page, maybe, as Alex said. It will be with a bit more detail in it. It will now have dummy data, very good for presenting ideas, mocking up fast, separate steps of the workflow, and very good to give initial idea to developers what they might have to come up in that step. So far we have these 2 files, and starting to combine them. Nothing different here as any other design team. We would work with those 2 files, and then we would use the Fiori library, the Sketch library, or the Figma one that we have, with all the atoms, molecules, and organisms to create a page. Well, a page even according to Brad Frost's atomic design that we are also discussing here. So that is a very, very brief, really skimming the surface of how we work. In 30 minutes, we can't do much else, but if nothing else, a few takeaways we would like you to take with you. So that is focus on the smallest building blocks. That is true not only for our enterprise work, but I can tell even with medium to big companies, if you work for, that will be beneficial in the long run. Question, what should be an atom, molecule, or organism? Or we talked about speed versus power. How you envision the project to develop in the future, and what will make your life easier, and also your colleagues' life that you implement it at some point. Push the controls to their limit. I definitely suggest testing everything in as much detail as you can, even though it might seem ridiculous to test even a button. It does pay dividends. If your project allows it, do it, because I'm fully aware with a tight budget and even tighter deadlines, sometimes these things are skipped. Consider how your building blocks can be used with different technology stacks. So what legacy are you going to use for the next team that decides that they would like to switch technologies, and they're excited about the new opportunities that this technology they've chosen provides to them. And again, keep questioning what you do. Even if you've done it, you've created something great, it's been done for ages, you might run into problems like the one I gave you with the table, which is quite simple, but actually when you delve into it into more detail, it's not. So I would like to thank you. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask them now or below our email addresses. You can just send us an email with whatever further questions you might have or any help that we can provide to you. So that's from us. Thank you.